right, so today we are going to talk a little bit about basic saddle fit. So my horse is a little bit of a hard fit. She's little, but believe it or not, she's pretty wide. She's a little bit mutton withered, meaning she doesn't have a lot of prominence to her withers. It's pretty flat. So my other English saddle, I was having the issue where when I would ride, my saddle was sitting a little bit too high up on top of her, and so it was continually rocking back and forth. And it was kind of giving me the feeling of when I have those old inflatable clowns that have sand in the bottom and you punch them and they kind of go like this. That's kind of what I felt like whenever I was riding her. So this is a different saddle I got that fit her a little bit better. So I thought maybe I'd just go through what to look for when it comes to basic saddle fit for an English saddle. So the first thing is the clearance of the pommel. And that's probably something most everyone knows, is obviously you don't want the pommel of your saddle to be sitting right down on your horse's withers. You want to be able to stick your fingers pretty clearly through the pommel and go even as far back as right here, the twist of the saddle. You want to make sure that it's not sitting down on your horse's back, especially after you mount your horse and you're sitting in the saddle. Sometimes you'll have clearance, while your saddle's just sitting on the horse and you're not in the saddle, but once you get on, it'll your weight will push the saddle down, and sometimes it will push that pommel down on the horse's back and not give you enough clearance. Not the case with this saddle and this horse. It actually fits pretty good. Another thing to look at is whether or not your English saddle bridges. And so to check for bridging, what you do is basically take your hand and stick it under the flap of the saddle. It's a little easier when it's not girthed up. Basically, you shouldn't feel a lot of space right here under the seat of the saddle between the saddle and your horse's back. If you see the saddle is just sitting on your horse's back, no pads, if you see daylight between the saddle and your horse's back, then chances are the saddle's bridging. Couple ways to deal with that. You can have a saddle fitter come and add some flocking to your saddle if it's a wool flock saddle. You could also use a special half pad that has a shim in it to kind of bridge that gap between your horse's back and the saddle. Or, worst case scenario, you might just have to get a different saddle that fits your horse a little better. The last point to look at is how these back panels fit on your horse. One hard thing about this horse is she's a little bit short coupled, and I'm a pretty tall rider. I'm 5'8", she's basically a pony. So that's been kind of an issue. It's just my saddle, if it wasn't this particular saddle, the panels would extend out a little bit further than is comfortable on her back. Luckily, her last rib kind of sits a little bit far back. So basically when she's standing square, where the weight-bearing part of the saddle fits, I'm just right on the edge of it kind of being acceptable. If the panels were a little bit longer, it would be too long for her back. And whenever she's standing square, these panels actually sit down pretty good on her back. Is it perfect? No, it's definitely not. There could definitely be room for improvement, but it does fit her reasonably well. It fits me reasonably well, and definitely better than my other saddle that had the wobble to it. One other thing to talk about on English saddles is how to properly run up your stirrups after you are done riding. So, of course, whenever you are ready to ride, you want to pull your stirrups down like this, so you're ready to go. But then after you are done, you want to run your stirrups back up your saddle. So to do that, basically you're going to take your iron in one hand and run it up the back side of the leather. And then what I do is I tuck it under the stirrup. I also, just to give a little bit of extra security, I go around the front of the iron and tuck it back through the back of the iron. And that just keeps it in place a little bit better. So why do you want to run up your stirrups after you're done riding? A couple of reasons. Number one, so they're not banging on your horse's side when you're walking your horse back to the barn, or whenever you're putting your saddle on and off. Another reason is if you have to go through any gates, say the gate to your arena or the gate out in a pasture, if you or your horse misjudge how close you are to the edge of the gate, it's very easy to get your stirrup caught on the gate, get your stirrup caught on a hook on a stall if you walk in the barn. So this is more than anything just a safety precaution to make sure that the stirrup doesn't get caught, and also as a comfort to your horse whenever you're pulling the saddle on and off your horse. So last thing to talk about when it comes to English saddle fit is how to make sure your girth is tightened correctly and sufficiently, because as I mentioned, if you have a saddle that wants to slide, if your girth isn't tight, that's just kind of adding to your problem. So when my horses are just standing, I always make sure to keep the girth fairly loose, tight enough where it's going to keep my saddle on, but not so tight where it's uncomfortable to them. Definitely not as tight as I'd have it before I ride. So right now it's pretty loose. You can kind of see a little bit of gap. So before I ride, I just make sure I tighten it up, and I like to do it gradually. Basically, I'll walk my horse in a couple of circles, and each time I stop, I'll just take the girth up one more hole. I try to get my girth pretty even on both sides, so it's not on hole number 1 on the right side and hole number 6 on the left side. I try to get 3 and 3 or 2 and 2, or whatever is even for that particular saddle and girth combination. And you want your girth tight enough where it is snug, where you can't get your hand through the girth, but not so tight that your horse can't breathe. So you just have to kind of find what that point is for you. One thing that's becoming more popular, and something that I've learned since I was an adult, is instead of checking your girth right here, it's actually better to check your girth down here, more under the belly, to make sure it's sufficiently tight. So again, before you ride, you just want to make sure there's a little bit of space where your horse can breathe, but definitely not enough space where you can get your whole hand through, because that does not go well. So if you ever forget to tighten your girth, you only do it once, and from that day on, you will always remember to check it not only once but twice before you get on. So that is just a little bit about English saddle fit, stirrups, and checking your girth for you.